We'll keep them all going until the very end of the webinar, and then we'll have our Q&A session there at the end. If you've got any questions, please do ask them, because obviously we're here to help you as much as possible. This is being recorded. It will be shared across our platforms with you tomorrow, along with a copy of the slides as a PDF. And also, if you've got any questions after the event itself and you want help with your grant application and you need further support, then obviously get in touch with us. So going forward, obviously we're here to talk about the Biomedical Catalyst grant funding call. My name's Claire Ansett. I'm the Operations Manager here at SEHTA. This is going to be our agenda for this afternoon. We're going to have a brief overview of the call and how to get ready for the grant, and that's going to through Eva from Bidshaper. Then we're going through to various legal requirements and IP requirements with our partners, Jamie Foster at Hill Dickinson and Robert Sacken at Reddy and Gross. Then we turn to health economics, and that's going to be with SEHTA's advisor, Dr. Simon Lee. And that will be followed by our health technology, medical device compliance advisor, Giovanni Melandri. He's going to talk about the regulatory requirements needed, and then we're going to Q&A. So I'm delighted to hand over to Eva, who's the co-founder and CEO of Bidshaper. So over to you, Eva, if you'd like to take control.
Thank you, Claire. I can see my control arrow, so I'll keep going. Delighted to be here this afternoon. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Eva, and I will walk you through the requirements of the grant and give you a little bit of a backdrop summary in terms of what is required for this particular round and the differential between the small grants and the larger size ones in terms of the procedural and additional requirements differences. Biomedical Catalyst needs to be industry-led, so the small, medium enterprises need to be the lead applicant. It's open to step change improvements, and you need to demonstrate strong market impact. To be eligible, you can operate within advanced therapies, digital health, medical devices, diagnostic or indeed new healthcare models. And in addition, a really important additional sentence within the listings is that the list is not exhaustive, which means that if your innovation is not clearly delineated or listed within this list, you can still submit an application provided you meet all the other eligibility criteria. And there is indeed an identified market need and a clear medical need for your innovation. To be eligible, the lead needs to be a UK registered SME. You have restrictions on turnover, on your balance sheet, and the number of employees. Your collaborators, however, can vary. You can include academic organizations, not-for-profit organizations. You can have other business partners. SMEs need to be more or equal to 50% of the cost, so you cannot hook up with a multinational who will constitute the bulk of the partnership deal. Non-SMEs such as RTOs, universities, charities, large businesses can be partners only. So there's a difference between co-applicants and partners. The project must be business-led. It needs to have a clear commercial potential. The project work must be done in the UK, and it needs to exploit the product results from and within the UK. So the whole premise of the funding is to increase the economic activity and the economic outcomes from this innovation within the UK footprint. The funding pot, the project size and the requirements, the funding available, grants can be up to 500,000 with the total cost up to 1 million. And then there's a second strand, which is large projects, where your grant can be up to 2 million with a total cost of up to 4 million. And the funding covers percentage of eligible costs. The percentage covered is driven by the size of the company. Really small companies can recover up to 70% match funding, 60% for medium-sized companies and 50% for large businesses. And this is something to be particularly mindful of when you are planning your financing and you are demonstrating your business sustainability and feasibility in the light of the ability to deliver throughout the entire life cycle of the grant. Experimental development that is allowed is 45% for small companies, 35% for medium ones, and 25% for large businesses. For non-business partners, they can recover up to 100%. So, for example, RTOs, charities, and 80% full economic cost for universities. The project requirements in terms of timeline, so these are your sort of benchmark factors to consider. Duration is either 6 to 24 months, so up to 2 years, or 6 to 36 months, so up to 3 years. They will be starting on the 1st of June, and there needs to be a clear route to market, commercial potential, and UK economic and health impact. And the application requires detailed application, finance plan, and impact assessment. So as you're going through the application form and you are looking at the different questions, they will be covering different aspects of your intended activities to be funded by this grant and the percentage that you need to cover yourselves from within the company's budgets. Do not disregard any of the questions. They are all equally important. And the process is one-stage process for small grants, which is a standard assessment process for Innovate UK, and an additional online interview panel for the large grants, which will occur in March 26. There are 5 assessors per grant application, and we've put a link to assessors guidance. Innovate UK is very explicit about the requirements for the grants and about how they will be assessed to create a fair level playing field. So you can get a lot of information to make sure that the granularity of your answers, the desired content of the answer, is provided for the assessors to review and score. And we will now move on to how do we actually prepare really strong grant applications. So first of all, I urge you all to really review the published information about this particular call. Even if you applied for previous biomedical catalyst calls, every call may have slight tweaks. Tomorrow morning, there will be a webinar from Innovate UK, which again, if you attend, please do. If you cannot, then I'm sure the content will be shared afterwards. It's well worth listening to the subtle differences between this particular call and the previous editions. And there are certain elements that you need to cover within your grant application to stand a good chance of winning. The current percentage rate is 10% success rate quoted by Innovate UK. So something to be really mindful of. This is a competitive process. So you need to be not just good, you need to stand out from the crowd. And there will be quite a few applicants because these funding streams are usually incredibly popular with small and medium enterprises. Now, within this particular session, we will set the scene for assessing your overall grant readiness and creating or consolidating your grant strategy, because this particular call should not be ad hoc decision. There's some money coming out, let's bid for it. This should be part and parcel of your product service development, your IP development strategy. And you should look at it as one of the elements of getting market ready, getting scale ready, rather than chasing grants. You should have a clear vision of which ones you're going for, why, and with which partners, to then increase your chances of market success. And the session will overlay the requirements from the specific BMC call onto the timelines, process, and content to give you a bit more of a preparation for what you actually need to put into the application form itself. And we will cover things to think about, which a lot of the time, companies rush into the application process without considering the impact of the application activity onto internal resourcing, bid preparation methodology, managing external organizations such as partner consortia, and managing the whole process in terms of risks to operations of business as usual. And I will also share very, very briefly the sort of the usual pitfalls that appear in the applications and can be easily avoided. So first of all, you need to perform your grant readiness assessment, which means, are you actually ready to apply for this particular call? Do you have all your ducks in a row, so to speak? So you need to ask yourself, why do you want this funding? What are you going to be doing with this? How does it fit within your broader strategy of product service development and the stage of the product development you're at, but also the stage of the business that you're at, because that's equally important. Your previous track record is important. And you may already have an existing content library. On your previous track record, if you had a failure before with Innovate UK where you failed to deliver on a grant, that counts very strongly against you. So that's why when you are considering bidding for this grant, take it really seriously, not just in terms of creating a really competitive application form, but also in terms of you will need to deliver what you say you will deliver on budget, on time. Unless you have really serious extenuating circumstances, for example, when COVID hit, obviously funders understood that this is beyond the control of the businesses and organizations trying to deliver their work. However, under any other circumstances, it's really important you stick to the project management plan you've submitted and you keep your word and you deliver what you said you would. Otherwise, all those things count against you for future applications as well. You need to consider whether you want to do this entirely in-house or whether you wish to use any external support. And the external support can constitute input from your collaborators, your partners within your consortium or your co-applicants, or it can include appointing third parties such as Bidshaper to help you with either the de novo writing, preparation, review, or preparing specific elements of your application that you feel you don't have the bandwidth or the expertise within. And you need to define your grant strategy. As I keep on repeating, this needs to fit within a larger picture. Otherwise, it's just a standalone chasing things. And you need to consider who your partners are and your subcontractors. There's a limitation in terms of subcontractors being preferred to be UK-based. And the whole remit of Innovate UK funding is that the beneficiary company and the subcontractors and the economic activity needs to remain within the UK. There's an additional caveat for discoveries in innovations which have impact on security, on national security, and you need to consider all those aspects in terms of who you're selecting to be working with. And finally, we will be touching later on in the session upon IP and other agreements. And again, please do take that element really seriously because IP disagreements, whilst the grant money is awarded, can really trip you up and they can lead to additional expenses and delays in the project completion. And other agreements, for example, if you're working with partners and they need to get the costings together, they need to decide if it's go or no go for them as an organization. Allow yourself plenty of time because the delays build up, accrue, and the deadline is what the deadline is. There's no mercy. The portal will close 5 seconds, on the nanosecond of the listed time. So even if you're 5 seconds late, you will not be able to submit. So something to be mindful of. The preparation process, the important deadlines. Obviously, the competition opened today, which means if you're not already on the portal, do go and register so you can have the full packet of information for this specific call. Tomorrow there will be an online briefing on the 12th of November at 10 a.m. where you can join. Briefing slides will be available to download afterwards, so you can get that content if you cannot attend. And the important deadlines to drive your preparation process. 10th of December, 11 a.m. the competition will close. The portal will stop accepting your applications. We've seen companies previously try to enter into a correspondence with Innovate UK. The only circumstance under which there's any sort of mercy is if the portal malfunctions for technical reasons. Under any other circumstances, you will not be given any sort of extension or resubmission or anything of that nature. So normally our advice to companies is please do submit ahead of time. So don't wait for the 10th of December, 11 a.m. Submit all your application materials on the 9th of December. By the 9th of April or on the 9th of April, the applicants will be notified of the outcome of their applications. And the expectations is that the projects will start from the 1st of June. Again, this is driving your preparation process, but this is also driving the content within your project management plan, which you will need to be submitting with the application form. And that needs to demonstrate how the elements you will be working on will be building from the 1st of June and building towards the outcomes and deliverables you've outlined within your application form. And they need to be credible, they need to be manageable, and your costs need to reflect the granularity of the work and the extent of the work. So it appears credible, and you will be able to deliver those outcomes for those prices and within those timelines you've delineated. In addition to the dates, I will just go back briefly. In addition to the dates, these are dates which govern both strands of the grant, so the small grant and the large grant. If you are applying for the large amount of money, in addition to that, you will have a two-stage process. So in addition to the application form initially, you will also have a panel interview process. The invitation to the panel interviews will be issued on the 27th of February, and the interviews will take place between 26th of March and 1st of April. So your interview will occur at some point during that time. So again, if you are going for the large grant strand, be mindful of those timelines and make sure that you have staff availability and the key personnel that is viable that is necessary for your success will be available on those dates. And the same goes for any partners you need to get content or supporting information from to really feel confident that you are presenting your application properly. You are not allowed to bring additional content. You will be presenting on the idea that was submitted. And the assessment process that is used is the standard assessment process. Your first pass is administrative level, is the manager of the call. They will remove non-eligible applicants. If you do not tick one of the boxes, you will be excluded from further consideration. Then it goes to the innovation lead, who then decides whether it's passed for the assessment or not passed for the assessment. Then there's the second pass, which is the assessors, the multitude of assessors who come from different backgrounds. They all are identified by the keywords. So again, when you ask for your 10 keywords for your application, be really clear about what it is you are writing about, because there'll be a multitude of different innovations coming in, and you want to be assessed by people who at least understand the market realities you're operating within and understand what the difficulties you may be facing are there, and will be able to look at your competition and assess your application fairly on the basis of their expertise. If there's a mismatch in expertise, you can sometimes lose out because someone completely doesn't understand the extent of the problem, for example, that you are trying to fix. So it's really important to get those keywords right, and they're used to match you with the correct assessors. And the assessors award they assess each question and they award points. The total of the points give you the percentage, and you need to be over 70% to have any chance of funding. So as I said previously, every section is important, every question is important, and do pay attention to every single component of it, however unimportant it may seem in a day-to-day business as usual. But all those things, even things like IP, description in terms of how are you managing your IP, how will you manage your IP in collaboration with your partners, all those aspects are super important, so please do not miss out on any. And there are two different approaches. One can be top score ranking or portfolio approach. The success rate for this particular competition is listed as 10%. And finally, just to touch upon the things that can go wrong with the application form. So one is utilizing AI without scrutiny, and that really pops up in the application forms, because you will have sort of more or less the correct content, but it's presented without the rationale, it's presented in the wrong places, it's very simplistic, and that really draws attention. There's lack of detail in any section. Do not consider any section as less important than, or any of the questions as any less important than the other, because the overall impression of your application, the clarity of writing, shows that you really thought things through. The quality of your risk register, the quality of your project management documents, it really comes across and can bring you up or push you down. So particularly if you're going for the larger grant, you are introducing more risk to the taxpayers' money. So both for the small grants and for the large grants, really do pay attention to details and make sure that your application form creates a coherent narrative, but all your appendices, all the supporting documents really support consistently what you're trying to achieve. And they're not sort of ad hoc collection of unconnected bits of support letters and letters of intention and things like that, which bear no relevance to the particular innovation you're pursuing, advancing, using this particular grant money. There's poor project management plans. For example, really simplistic Gantt charts, or sort of, sequential ChatGPT derived visuals really don't cut the mustard. You really need to demonstrate that you have those skills, either in-house or from a third party, to deliver the project if the money is awarded to you. And poor appreciation of risk, where people sometimes consider the technical risks, but they do not consider other risks which may accrue as the project continues. That also does not score very highly. And excessive commercial optimism without evidence. Again, that doesn't sound credible. So if you are putting the assessment of your total addressable market, if you're putting assessment of your customers' appetite for purchasing things, if you are doing your market segmentation, do remember there's competition. And there are precedents and there are established incumbents. Unless you have a really blue sky breakthrough innovation, you're not operating in a green field, which means there are others. So you need to demonstrate how you differentiate and how your solution is superior. And again, it will be touching upon health economics and regulatory. Those aspects are also super important, because ultimately even if the innovation improves the outcomes, it improves the process. If it costs 10 times more, at least until it scales up, then that immediately puts up a barrier to adoption. So be very clear that your commercial projections are evidence-based, are research-based, are realistic, so they don't come across like wishful thinking. And finally, really basic thing is missing text and errors. And that's again what I'm saying, plan to submit a day, 2 days before the cutoff deadline, because it's amazing how when people work in a rush, they're really pushing things through, bringing content together, particularly when you're working with partners or subcontractors. You need to extract that content in a coherent and consistent manner from them and bring it into your application and spin it together. So it's a complete, consistent narrative, which tells a story. And when assessors read that application form, all aspects need to be equally strong, and there needs to be no errors. By the time that application goes in, it needs to be completely bulletproof, and leaving really obvious things like missing text and errors, it just implies lack of attention, and that immediately flags up the risk aspect to whoever is assessing it. And again, pay attention to all the sections equally, because they're all equally important, and the points are accrued. It's not that some sections are weighted more heavily than the others. Questions 1 to 8 are not scored, but the rest of the questions are, and each one of those can add to your overall score, which can mean the difference between the 70% or below. And again, sometimes you can have a situation where there are multiple strong applications, but again, it's a consideration of the bigger context and the bigger picture in terms of which one will be awarded. If you do not get the funding, do not consider that as a personal failure. Do not consider that as some kind of feedback in terms of the viability of your product or business process. Consider that as basically learning curve. It's feedback. It allows you to discover where you don't communicate. You discover your intentions, your ambitions clearly, where you may be missing some elements considered important by external third parties. And every application feedback is your building block to a stronger application next time. But again, as I mentioned, if you choose to work with external parties such as Bidshaper ourselves, we're very explicit in terms of our charges. We charge a flat fee. We work with experienced writers who will provide you very, very thorough feedback. And sometimes having a fresh pair of eyes on your beloved baby creation really flags the things that you stop seeing. Because when you work with your innovation really closely, day in, day out, you stop seeing its faults, you stop seeing that some things are not obvious to external audiences. And that would be my overall advice in terms of really paying attention to every single aspect of the application, managing your collaborators really closely, getting the content, getting the agreements, and attending to the IP ownership, IP log, and making sure that there's no surprises for the Innovate UK, the funder, once the money is awarded to you. So that would be what I'd like to share with you today. Thank you.
Jamie, would you like to now take control? Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Claire. Good afternoon, everybody. Good to see everybody and be able to talk to you today. Thank you, Eva. That was a very helpful run through. I am going to talk about legal requirements. An important part of this, as has already been mentioned, is intellectual property, which Robert is going to come on to talk about, so I'm not going to talk about that. But just a couple of pointers on legal things. It's an interesting subject, really, because you might ask, what are the legal requirements to submit a bid? And I think it breaks down to a few questions and requirements. So fundamentally, being clear that you're eligible to apply, being clear who is applying, and if you're in a consortium, who is the lead applicant. These are fairly straightforward questions, you might think, but clearly very important, and we do see them incorrectly applied from time to time. And then looking specifically at legal requirements, I think there's something around being clear about the legal model for any consortium application that you're going to make. So we see time and again as lawyers issues where parties are successful in a grant, and then they haven't really sorted out how the money's going to be apportioned between them, or the grant application documents are unclear, and they get into a big mess afterwards trying to sort all of that out. So being clear up front is really important. And then also recognizing that if you are successful, the lead applicant is going to have to enter into grant terms and conditions, likely the UKRI standard T's and C's. And they have various terms in which everyone will need to be aware of. Even if you're not the lead applicant, it's important to recognise that the lead applicant is likely to flow down the grant terms and conditions to you as a subcontractor in a consortium, so they will still be relevant. So those, I think, are the two key requirements. What I just wanted to talk about briefly was some sort of practical tips based on what we've seen at this stage in bidding processes. So just a quick slide here. I extracted some of the key points from the criteria that were set out for this competition. Eva's already touched on some of them. I think it goes back to the very simple: make sure you answer the question. The criteria are very clear here about what you can and can't do, around what you have to do if you're in a consortium in terms of who can be the lead, where subcontractors can be based, all sorts of things like that. So the devil really is in the detail, as always. One thing that I think is worth flagging is that Innovate UK is unable to award organisations that are considered to be in financial difficulty grants, and we do see that from time to time. It's really important to make sure, if you are in a collaboration, that all of the partners that you're working with are financially sound. We've seen issues where that's not the case. A grant has been awarded, perhaps a lead applicant has got into financial difficulty, and in that situation it's very difficult to convince Innovate UK to swap the lead applicant. So it's really important to make sure that the consortium partners are financially sound and you pick the right one to be the lead. And that comes on to a wider issue around due diligence, which I'll talk about in a second. I think it's worth just putting up this slide. Some of you who've heard me speak before may have seen this, but this is just I think it's useful just to put into context where you are in terms of submitting a bid. So you will already have been in discussions with any partners you're going to bid with, and so you're at the middle block here, the bid submission stage. And what that means is that you can be proportionate in terms of the documentation you have in place with your partners at this stage. Formal documents are not needed for the bid stage, unless I'm sure someone will correct me, but I didn't see it looking through the paperwork that there was a requirement to have a signed collaboration agreement with any partners at the point you submit. And if that is right, then there's no point putting time and money into doing that at this stage. You're better off waiting until you know that you've won the grant. Caveat there, I was looking fairly briefly and quickly through the document, so if anyone does spot that that is a requirement, then please do shout. So I think you need something by way of documentation, whether that's the way that you're clear about the consortium arrangements in the application itself, or whether you put that into a different document like a memorandum of understanding. But either way, you need to be really clear about who is doing what in a consortium. And I mentioned due diligence. It's really, really, really important to do the due diligence on your partners. In many cases, of course, for competitions like this, partners working together will have known each other for a long time and are comfortable in their roles and responsibilities and who's going to do what. But sometimes that isn't the case, and you have to choose a new partner. And in that case, it's really important to ask the questions set out on this slide. So what can your partner bring that you don't have? How will they provide their contribution? Have you done DD on them? Commercial, financial, legal DD? Make sure you're satisfied with them and that you're happy to enter into a collaboration with them, because clearly it's not ideal to submit for an important competition and then find out that you picked the wrong partner. So it may sound obvious, but that is a very live issue that is seen again and again when grants are not successful. There are a couple of legal models you can look at in due course around what a collaboration would look like. As I said, I don't think you need to put these in place now. They need to be put in place if and when you win the grant funding. But broadly speaking, there are two options. There's contractual and there's corporate. And contractual is by far the easiest. That's entering into, for example, a collaboration agreement that just sets out who's going to do what. And then there's corporate, and a corporate model is one where you go off and set up a new company, and you use that as the organization that delivers on the project. Now, if you were very successful at the top end of the grant funding on this project, then it may be that you might look at entering into a corporate joint venture and set up a new company with your partners. But that doesn't happen very often. But I think it's worth just keeping in mind at this stage the contractual versus the corporate, and in due course the fact that you're going to have to plump for one of them. So at this stage, as I said, be aware that you're going to have to enter into terms and conditions with UKRI as the lead applicant, and then by way of flow down as a subcontractor. Make sure you've got NDAs in place with your partners. Usually they are worth having in place, even if you're not gonna take legal action against them. They're a really important statement of intent. And then one other thing that you could look at is a memorandum of understanding. As I say, in many cases, a grant application is really clear about who is doing what and who would get which bits of funding, of course, because it has to be. That's part of the application process. But it might be that there's some level of detail that you don't want to put in the application, but you do want to agree with your partners. And in that case, it is worth looking at some kind of MOU or heads of terms or letter of intent, and just putting down on paper what the commercial terms are between you as partners. And some of the things you want to address through the application and through an MOU are who the lead applicant is, what their responsibilities are of each party, the commercials, what are the inputs, what are the outputs, how are funds going to be shared, how will any liabilities be shared, and then some more legal things like indemnities, warranties that you see in contracts, recognizing that the UKRI terms might require monies to be withheld or paid back, and you need to make sure that is recognized. And then crucially, intellectual property as well, which we're about to come on to. So I suppose the summary is there aren't any strict legal requirements that you've got to comply with other than what the rules say for this competition. So make sure you read them properly. But I do recommend just bearing in mind these wider issues when you're putting together your bid consortium for the purpose of applying. Happy to answer any questions at the end. And now I think over to Robert.
Thanks a lot, Jamie. Now to take back control. I have lost the control button for the slides. Have I done something silly?
Okay, they seem to have, for some known reason, disappeared.
That's okay.
Okay, let me get them back up.
That's better. Wonderful.
Yeah, let me go to your slides for you. It'd be quicker for me to do that at this end.
Lovely.
Okay, though, if you'd like to take control now.
Wonderful. Thank you. Okay, so I'm I'm Robert Sackin. I'm a European and UK patent attorney and partner at Ready and Grows. And no surprise, I'm going to talk about the IP requirements of the form. It's perhaps stating the obvious that why does the form have these requirements to talk about IP? There are lots of figures floating around for a typical portion of a business's value in its IP. And when I Googled around writing these slides, some sites were saying it's up to 90% of a business's value. Sure, that might be on the high side, but there's certainly no argument that it's a significant portion of the value of any business. So in the form for this grant application, you're asked about freedom to operate and strategy for filing registered IP rights, such as patents and registered designs, and also about unregistered rights, particularly trade secrets or know-how. Businesses file patent applications and show freedom to operate to help bring in funding and ultimately help the business exit. They do it to fill in forms just like this one. Patents are only rarely actively enforced. With any IP strategy, we advise a proportional approach dependent on the money you have to spend, and a good firm of patent attorneys will tailor what they do to suit your budget. And as Eva emphasised in her initial talk, with forms like this, our experience from our clients, it's all about being realistic. And so we strongly recommend having a strategy, even if that strategy is to do nothing in terms of registering IP rights and rely on trade secrets or know-how, for example. So the form has two questions to do with IP, questions 10 and 13. First question is about freedom to operate, ownership of IP and protecting your own IP. And the second question is about protecting your own IP only. And I'll, not surprisingly, start with the first question, question 10. So that gives a few things that I've got on the slide, a few questions. It states, it wants you to set out the freedom you have to operate and the current state of IP ownership, your strategy for protecting the knowledge and IP resulting from your project, and also to provide evidence that you have freedom to operate and that you can work without infringing other patents, for example, by summarising results of patent searches. And what a summary that needs to be. For the whole of question 10, that I think is 11 sections, 2 of those sections are about IP. So I think you have 73 words if you split it all equally to do all that. Although for this question, you are allowed to include an appendix of 2 pages of A4, but even then that's to cover all these 11 sections, of which only 2 of them are to do with IP. So there's very little time, very little space, very few words, a little space for diagrams. So I had a quick go at writing something that might work, and even these 2 sentences, short paragraphs on the slide, that's 81 words. It's very little. So in this reply, so I've said again, I'll go back to it again. Eva said, always be realistic, open, honest, be authentic. So, for example, try and bring this into being the work of your patent attorney who's given you this advice. Name the firm, the person who's given you the advice. And frankly, even if you haven't got much money at this stage, you'd hope that a good firm again would give you an hour of free time for a new client or for a new project. We'll hope to get some more work from you downstream, and so that's the way we can help you easily. So then the next thing I would say is we won't ever give freedom to operate, especially at the at the opening stages of a project for a whole ton of reasons. And really what you're trying to say at this stage is that there are no significant roadblocks to the project. There are all sorts of reasons for this, especially you perhaps don't have and probably don't have a final product yet. So that's what we only ever give freedom to operate to, would be a final project. You may not even have a working prototype. There are many other reasons why a lot of unknowns early on. Patent applications only publish 18 months after they've been filed. So there's a period of unknown when you don't know what may form a patent later, when you're also working on a project. And anyway, even after a patent application has been filed and published, it can take several years to grant, if at all, before the scope of protection is finalised. Assessing freedom to operate, or even given some identification of potential roadblocks, is difficult, and it's not something we recommend that people don't do it without some really good advice and help from an experienced professional. There are again many reasons for that. I'm sure you all know that the scope of protection of a patent is defined by legalistic clauses. They're hard to understand, they're pretty daunting, and they really need to be interpreted by someone who is very experienced in interpreting those clauses. And while patent office registers are public and free to access, it is not on the face of it clear what they are saying. And again, it requires a lot of experience to realise what they're saying. You might be concerned about what you think is a granted patent, only to be told by your patent attorney, in fact, it's a patent application that died some years ago, and you won't ever get a granted patent for the what's described in the application. If you do want to have a look around yourself about IP, I've put a couple of the free commonly used databases to do your searching on. I use this BASnet database myself. It's been around for literally decades. You may prefer the Google Patents database, perhaps a more familiar interface. For this kind of exercise, I would recommend, and again, going back to Eve's initial comments about if you're trying to be realistic for something like this, I would look to limit what you're searching to who you view as your closest competitors. There is always one, there is often more, and that's a way of showing you're being realistic about your project. You're not doing this in isolation, there are others around. And actually to find out what they are doing, what patent applications they have, is something you can hopefully do fairly easily, fairly cheaply, and actually helps you answer this question as best you can. These are the entities who are most likely to have relevant patents and patent applications to your project, and you can hopefully get a small or realistic number to look at carefully and explain realistically and briefly why what you are doing is different, and you hope significantly different to what they're doing. There are many other ways, of course, to limit the number of relevant patents and patent applications you might find. Limiting by inventor names, typically it'll be the founder or CTO, senior body of a startup is the norm. Probably likely know who they are. And if they have a common name, if they're a David Smith or something, then maybe you might need to limit it slightly by perhaps some keywords. You can also easily limit down by patent classification classes. So patents are classified in terms of their invention by classes, and there are a list of these on say on the BASnet database that I use. That can help you get a realistic number of hits to try and find out easily what might be relevant to your project. So the next stage, the next sentence, Ollie, of this is about who owns your IP, and again that will be set out in the sort of contracts that the solicitor should help you on with this project. And I'd hope a simple statement like that your business owns our current IP, any IP our business generates through relevant contracts. Simple sentence covers it all, and hopefully Jamie or other solicitors can help you get those contracts in place. And then the kind of advice you might say about what you're going to file is, and often clients tell us, and again, it's about being realistic on what you say on the form, is when's the right time to file a patent application. And I would say generally that's when you have a working prototype and before you make your invention public, to disclose it outside your business, and to include some sort of budget. And I've put a figure, very rough outline of a figure to file an initial patent application. It varies hugely based on the complexity and technology. And again, a good firm patent attorneys will tell you what they do to suit your budget. But maybe there's a figure there to give you an idea. So the next question 13, that deals with IP, again gives you similarly few words in which to cover it off. Question 13 asks you how you protect and exploit the outputs of the project, for example, through know-how, patenting, designs, or changes to your business model. I don't think the changes to your business model is really an IP question. And again, you've got, I think, 50 words to deal with this. And for this section, there's no appendix to support your answer. And I think they're looking for an understanding of what the different IP rights are and how you might use them. And I gave a very short example here. This is 45 words in 3 sentences. You're allowed 50. It's really not covering very much. So again, the 3 IP rights that are mentioned are know-how. And I actually was thinking, just as I wrote these slides, just as an example about how these different rights might come into play. And actually, sometimes they all come into play, sometimes they don't. Registered designs are fairly rarely used. They can be useful. They're pretty cheap, relatively cheap, and can be useful in certain circumstances. You may well not want to make use of those. They're protecting an aesthetic aspect of a product. That could be, for example, a casing of a physical product. It could be a screenshot of your app or your website or something like that is how they can be used. But they provide fairly limited protection. But to give an example, I was thinking of just an example invention and where the different IP, registered IP and non-registered IP systems come into play. Is perhaps my example was a smart inhaler that makes sure people with asthma take their medication effectively. And so this inhaler has a technically neat internal mechanical design and aesthetically distinctive casing, and also connects to an AI system in the cloud. So you might want to say that that you will protect aspects of innovation that you can keep secret through know-how. In this example, that might be such as the AI system that's in the cloud. It's effectively a black box. You don't know how this AI system is implemented. It might be something that you keep secret and protect it through know-how. You might well then say that you protect our technical innovation that we have to make public. You had to make public through patenting in relevant jurisdictions. Of course, patents are jurisdictional rights. They only cover the countries in which they are in place. And a very good way of having a very sensible, realistic IP budget is only protected in very limited markets. And maybe that's UK only, which really keeps your IP costs down. But for patent protection, this example, that might protect the neat mechanical design of the inhaler. That might be protected through a patent application. And then finally, you may say that you'll protect the aesthetic aspects of your product through registered designs in relevant jurisdictions. And again, for this smart inhaler example, it may be the aesthetically distinctive casing that you protect through registered designs. I hope that helps. Again, please do feel free to put questions in the chat, and I'll pick those up at the end, and then I'll pass over to Simon to talk about the health economics aspects.
Thank you, Robert. Simon, if you'd like to take control.
There we go. Right, I'm assuming you can see that. Yeah, so I'm going to talk you through health economics, which is going to be absolutely critical in this bit. There's no two ways about it. I think it's really important to state up front that the health economics here for your bid comes in two ways. The first way is proving that your bid itself, or at least beyond a reasonable doubt, demonstrating that your bid itself represents a good use of taxpayer money. That's the first side of the health economics within this bid. So it's actually the ROI on the investment in the evidence that you're aiming to go for here. The second thing is then your health economics within your bid and how you can actually demonstrate this properly, how you can actually show that you're making a difference, not just the theoretical that you're putting in up front here before you've collected any evidence, but the actual demonstration of this. And we're going to walk through both because they're both equally important here. It's worth saying for me up front straight away that when we look at health economics, typically it's often misunderstood. I just want to address this heads up straight away, just before we go in. I want to be super clear about this, that we often look at health economics for these things, and when we're at market in general, as kind of like a fourth hurdle. It's like, oh, we've done all our clinical effectiveness. It's great. We've proven that it works. Now we need to prove that it's worth paying for. And this isn't quite right, because it treats it like a box to be ticked for procurement, which isn't really correct. It isn't this regulatory hurdle to be overcome. It's certainly not about proving perfection. I'm going to demonstrate this imminently. It's not all about nices and qualities. We're not really bothered about the nice style stuff too much here. Let's be honest, most of us here aren't going to get taken up by nice. Some of us may, but most of us won't. It's not only for academics, and it doesn't have to be as complex and confusing as many people make it out to be. Actually, my job here is to hopefully convey the fact that we can make this quite simplistic and exceptionally convincing. And that's where I'm going here. That's what I'm trying to achieve. So when we look at the reality of using health economics within this bid, we need to use it sparingly and use it where it's put to best use. And for me, there are several questions where this is going to fit in. It's question 18 around your overarching value from your bid, i.e., is it going to provide the taxpayer with a solid return on investment where they could have put it somewhere else? Is it going to highlight blockers to commercial success, like question 13, how we're going to grow the business and increase long-term productivity? Question 17, how will this funding move you towards commercialization? Because we're not just looking at one thing. The reality is that the health economics fits into several strands of your value proposition. And it's about gradually unpicking these and showing how much impact you can have through receiving this funding. The key thing here is that the funding is going to fundamentally unlock something that you couldn't do previously. And that's the key thing here. So again, what is this impact going to be from funding itself? So when we move forward, the whole point of this is to prove that it doesn't just work, but that it's worth paying for. That's the key thing here. There are many technologies that work, and as Eva said, they cost an absolute fortune. It's no good improving something kind of only marginally or incrementally, or even by a significant amount, if we're going to bleed the taxpayer dry for it. We need to make sure that it's worth spending on. And that's the role here. That's what we have to do in a very convincing, methodical, transparent, and objective manner. And it's really that simple. And the way that we're doing this ultimately is because funders are only going to back the solutions that create measurable, actual tangible savings and or productivity gains, and do so in a way that is ultimately over the longer term going to save more money than it costs. NHS buyers only adopt solutions that improve outcomes without massively inflating budgets. Ideally, we're going for a cost neutrality here, or even a cost saving. Doesn't always work that way with some novel therapeutics where there is a premium to pay for them. But in general, we're trying to show that we're not going to add more to the cost envelope than we're going to take away. And importantly, investors believe that investors believe in companies that can quantify accurately their pricing, their target actual addressable market, the potential addressable market, and this helps significantly with this. So when we look at the questions 9 to 18, you can kind of see briefly here how health economics may be able to fit in and support this. So for question 9, looking around the unmet need and the market opportunity, they're saying that, but to me, instead of saying what's the business need, health tech need, tech challenge, what it's actually saying is map the care pathway, quantify the clinical and economic burden, and show where your innovation reduces costs or waste. That's how I'm reading it. How bad is it currently? And what is the cost of this to the taxpayer and in terms of foregone health? So how rubbish are things currently? Why are you doing this? And how much better do you think you can make it? That's what question 9 says to me from a health economic perspective. From 13, looking at long-term growth and productivity, it's about modeling scalability, return on investment, workforce efficiency, and proving that you can create sustainable improvements. 14, wider impact outside your team. We want to look at these ripple effects, really important here. So we want to be able to hypothesize up front what these are going to be and then measure them proactively throughout. So are we going to reduce waiting times? Are we going to improve patient experience, workforce well-being, system resilience? Any of these things, there's so many options. I'm going to touch on these in a minute. So many options that you can cover here. How's funding going to accelerate progress? Again, showing that funding unlocks evidence generation. This is the key thing. So we want to look at market access, value demonstration, and we want to show unequivocally that by receiving this funding, we have moved forward commercially. We've unblocked a barrier that was stopping us. We've got an ROI tool now that means that we can now go forward and sell to prospects confidently because we've worked out how much we're saving them. It's all about proving it demonstrably and transparently. This is the key thing. They're the key terms here. So when we look at health economics across the whole development life cycle for a technology, obviously there's a lot to do for developing a technology. Just a quick demonstration here. I'm sure some of you have seen this if you follow me on LinkedIn. If I do not envy innovators, you have got an awful lot to do, like an awful lot. You follow any one of those lines and you've got so much stuff to do. But if we just focus for now, maybe the it's worth paying for line, it's my favorite line. There's a ton of stuff you have to do. But looking at the bid here, I've just highlighted a few to make it even. This is where health economics is going to support you across your life cycle and how you can do this through this bid. So we can monitor resource shifts, we can monitor productivity gains, we can start to quantify unmet needs, we can work on quasi-interventional evaluations and real-world data, cashable savings, cost effectiveness, refining our business cases, segmentation, calculating ROI, value-based prices, refining that value proposition even tighter, looking at quality of life, and getting some did you knows on the go, which I didn't quite fill in there. So some positive marketing messaging. So it will unlock a lot for you going forward. Hence why you need to do it properly in the bid to make sure that you get the best chance of making it a success. And I've got a few top tips for you in doing this. I'm going to try and be really short and sharp with this. The first thing is don't just go for any question. When you're doing this, have a serious think before you go for this bid as to, on the questions that you're going to answer at the end when it comes to an evaluation side, which are the questions that actually need answering? The ones that when answered are going to support your value prop the most. And this is really important because you're going to have to evidence at the end of this that this has had some form of impact. And you want to make sure that you're evidencing on the things that make the biggest difference. So if we look here, I have a technology. It's great technology. But if my rate of adverse events from, my impact goes from, let's say, the biggest it could be to the smallest it could be, doesn't have that much impact on my value. Efficacy has a bit of an impact, but my adherence has a massive impact from the worst it could be to the best it could be. So I want to focus my efforts here, making sure that I can evidence this, because what that's going to do is mean that I can increase my pricing because my value is going to be more certain. That also means that my addressable market is then going to be larger and more certain. Everything goes better. So it's about making sure that you focus on the right things up front. The second thing is about getting creative, like actually be creative with this, because there is no hard and fast rule here. All it is about showing the difference between what's happening right now and what you're doing. It's about finding out what matters most and what changes most. That's the key thing. So you could look at anything. You could look at the cost per verruca removed. You could look at the cost per pound lost. You could even look at the cost per quality if you wanted to. You can use any of these. And the great thing with health economics is that it is all about creativity. We could look at A&E admissions, unplanned attendances, CBT sessions, you name it. There is an unending list. And the great thing about this is that all of these have a unit price attached to them, or most of them do. Equity doesn't. But we can then use that and start to generate some really specific, detailed estimates of how much you're going to save the health system if you were scaled up beyond this bid. Moving on, if we start to look at needs, this is the key thing. So many people, when they're writing bids, focus on features rather than needs. Actually focus on the real world needs. So, and the best way to do this often is through qualitative research. So the why behind the what. It's not either or. You can get some quals done beforehand to understand people's actual pain points. It's going to go a lot further in helping you articulate needs and articulate benefit better. So really do go to town on that. Focus on the right things, not just on the features. Create a bit of FOMO. Go for it. Like, make some FOMO. Spell out the costs of not using your innovation. Be exceptionally explicit about this. Nothing says this is what we will do better than showing by what you could have done with the money that you could have saved if you'd have modeled it out. So an example here from a previous client who hypothesized a rather optimistic £132 million saving over a given period of time. I use the term rather quite loosely. That would have unlocked 4,500 mental health therapists, 12 million antidepressants, 3,000 pacemakers. You get the idea. Even if your benefit was 1 million, still take 30 pacemakers or 3,500 gym memberships. So it's about just making that point a little bit more explicitly. Sometimes nothing says it better than showing what you're going to miss out on. My next tip is keep it simple. Really keep it simple. If your kids can't understand it, there's no way anyone else can. And that is my biggest message I can give you. Don't try and do really fancy over the top Nobel Prize winning models. Don't try and complicate things. For the love of God, do not go to ChatGPT and try and get it to do a model for you of what you're going to save, because it will be an utter disaster. There is no two ways about it. Just keep it simple. It really is that. It's pragmatic, fit for purpose, transparent, objective, repeatable. The principles of health economics. Do that and you're onto a winner. So we're not trying to do this when we're making this big fancy bridge over here. We're just throwing a log over the top and walking over. It's literally that simple. We're not trying to gild the lily on this. It's just about doing what we absolutely have to showcase our value. Get a nod in there to segmentation and price discrimination. This is an opportunity for you to test different vignettes, different segments, and to see if people respond in different ways. It may be that you hand your technology out to a group of different people and they have way, way different uptake, effectiveness, and cost effectiveness. So this is your chance to really go to that segmentation, persona building, and look at that. And a good example here is IVF. IVF typically has a 5% effectiveness in women over 42, but it's 75% in women over 40. Under 40, sorry, 15 times more effective, 15 times more cost effective. Therefore, if you were offering it, you could offer 15 times as much to women under 40 as you could to women over 42. It's about looking at where things have the greatest benefit. This is really important. Take a learn from the pharmaceutical industry. Do it and do it well. And finally, coming towards the end, get the right support in place. It's one of those things where we often do it last. We often just chuck it in at the end. We see what budget's left and we go, oh, we better do some health economics as well and see what we can do. It's kind of like just trying to squeeze it in at the end. But please don't do that. Please make sure that you do this proactively going forward, because the key thing is, if you do this well, by the time you come out of it at the other end, you'll have a market ready value-based price. You'll be able to demonstrate unequivocally and demonstrably how you make a benefit for your end buyers. You'll be able to do some true accurate market sizing that you can stand behind for investors. You'll be able to segment and work out who best to go to, who best to sell to, and how your price may differ. You may come out of this with an interactive return on investment or business case generator, so you can then make your sales and your pipeline a lot richer and a lot easier to churn through. Talking of churn, if you can articulate your ROI better, you're going to protect against that and you're going to help with ARR. So make sure that you're doing this properly. And finally, you're going to be able to work out which evidence gaps of the many ones out there that are all competing for your effort and for this funding actually need filling. And that's the key thing here. So circling back to the beginning, when we look at health economics, when we look at the actual truth of it, it's actually a really decent way of quantifying your value story in a way that investors and commissioners are going to trust. It's a translator between your innovation, your impact, and bridging these features that we talked about loosely to real world costs and outcomes. It's your pricing engine. It's a credibility amplifier, and it is for everyone, especially early stage innovators. It's one of the best things that we could really invest in at this moment in time. So we need to do it properly. And bids like this are a golden opportunity to set yourself up for this over the longer term. So I implore you that if you are going to do it properly. And that is me. I've tried to whistle through that.
Thank you, Simon. That was really interesting. Okay, Giovanni, would you like to let me take control back? There you go. Giovanni, can you take control now? Thank you.
Thank you. Let me just get my camera. All right. Yes, good afternoon, and I've got the last shift, but adding to many of these points that have been made, and about the different aspects that need to be addressed during your application. I would say that the regulatory aspects, as much as the economic ones are often left and tacked on at the end, the regulatory ones also are often left too late. And so I just want to give you a taste of what needs to be considered along the way, and to show you that it's best to take it on piece by piece rather than all at the end. So just a very general guidance overall. The projects that are coming into this bid are all healthcare related, but that spans across many different types of technologies. So I'm going to try and give a touch on the different regulations here. But in the end of the day, you're going to have to look at what applies to your technology. And if you get this regulatory readiness going and aligning it with the goals of the company and the benefits to the patients, if you align all of that together, then you reduce the risk of the delays and the rework. We've had projects that go into serious rework and delays because they underestimated this component. You get quicker approval when it comes time to getting ethical approval and final regulatory approval and even post-market surveillance. You get improved adoption and reimbursement if people have good evidence and quantifiable benefits and the risks of the product. Then that also helps with your adoption and also the procurement. And then the investment attractiveness. A lot of investors understand that regulatory is a massive value inflection for businesses, and the minute they show that they pass certain tests and that they are approved, the value of the business jumps up substantially. So the key concepts that I wanted to introduce: make sure that everyone has an intended purpose or use and the indications as soon as they can. So at about technology readiness level 4 or so, then usually you should start to be settling on one. Sometimes there's more than one intended purpose or one group of patients that you're focusing on. But over time that will refine, and then your evidence strategy will align with that particular core concept. Your classification, that's an early stage way to understand the risk level and how you fit in. And sometimes you need to reduce the scope of the product in order to manage risk. And then moving on to the evidence that you're going to generate during the development process. If you can generate safety, efficacy, and performance, mostly that's for in vitro diagnostics, you can basically, you're building a case to the regulator to say, my benefits outweigh the risks. And that's more of an art than a science at the end to bring all of that together. But essentially, you're showing that all these different measurables are valuable in terms of your product. And the goal is to document as you go and to suit it to the development stage. So it's not about doing everything up front, but it's about developing your documentation of your project as you go. Moving on to some of the applicable regulations, we've got advanced therapies and drugs. Therapeutics basically are under the human medicines regulations. Similarly, the laboratory technologies are under good laboratory practice and the ISO 17000. The diagnostics and biomarkers, as well as medical technologies, are all in the medical device regulations. And then this grant even covers things like digital and data-driven health, healthy aging. So those will be more consumer-focused and data protection focused and related to consumer protection. So that's an additional side to consider. Your project can include all these different activities. So you might show that you're going to implement certain laboratory standards, good manufacturing processes, quality management systems, and usability standards. If you speak with us as SEHTA, or we can guide you in terms of the different applicable standards at different stages. We can have a discovery call to help with that if necessary. The clinical standards would be ISO 14055. So GCP governs the clinical trials as you go through. Then I've just taken a quick chance to look at specific application questions. Something I forgot to mention is that when you're choosing your sub-suppliers and you're choosing the structure of your bid, you are going to have to think about the way that, similar to the way that intellectual property is shared and is managed between the different partners, the quality management and regulatory management, the responsibilities need to be shared between the different parties. So for instance, if your supplier has an ISO 13485 quality management system, your project might build on that and have a quality agreement with that supplier. So some of those agreements will come after you are awarded the money, but essentially to understand how quality management and regulatory approval will be managed depending on the stage of your project. So as I said, I've got a few of the questions that I've looked at in more detail. Question 9 is the need or challenge. So sometimes regulations are changing. For instance, AI in healthcare those regulations are changing quite rapidly at the moment, and different jurisdictions have different guidance. We're mostly focusing on the UK base, but it's always helpful to look at regulational changes that are happening in other jurisdictions, and that's on the wider impact. In question 13, this is a core question with regards to regulatory approval, and basically in this one you would give the most detail about how your technology area and your regulatory strategy align with your go-to-market strategy and your choice of which approvals you're going to use. I mentioned there the reliance and recognition. These are different concepts in regulatory affairs where the company uses approvals in other markets in order and to get some early approval, and then comes to the UK afterwards. The different regulatory bodies around the world have different recognition of each other's or reliance on each other's approval. So definitely look into that, and it can get a little bit technical, but worth looking at if that's your strategy. If I say, for instance, links to the US market is quite common. Finally, the wider impacts in question 14, we've got the wider impacts in terms of clinical guidance. So for instance, the regulator may adjust some of its views on some of the technology, especially very new technology or combination devices. Those often push the limits of regulatory approval. So that's something to have a look at. And then the final one is just the risk management. So you have, as mentioned earlier, risk in the product and risk in the project. So you might have to think about product risks, hazards, and things that can go wrong with the product, and then also how that links up to regulatory project risks. So for instance, what happens if you don't get approval, or if you don't have a documentation in place in time for specific submissions. So thank you very much. I think open to any questions.
Thank you very much. I'll take back control. Well, that brings us to the end of all the presentations. So thank you to all our speakers. We've got some questions, I think, already posed into the Q&A. We've got quite a few in there now. So I'll start with the very first one from Maria Bartolo. Are there any acceptable justifications for using non-UK partners and or subcontractors?
I can take that one, Claire. From my point of view and experience, very occasionally, and you need to demonstrate a really strong justification why this is happening. So, for example, if you need really specialist input or use of facility expertise that simply does not exist in the UK at the level of maturity or accessibility or cost that you can access elsewhere, then yes, you may justify it, it may be permitted. However, these are very limited circumstances. And again, nowadays, there's an additional requirement of considering national security as an aspect. So before going for contractors outside of the UK, do your market search really thoroughly and be absolutely confident that there isn't a local alternative that you can utilize.
Thank you. Next question is from Alistair Monty. What needs to be provided to confirm financial viability, both in terms of benchmarks and documentation, e.g. months of runaway plus company bank statement?
At the point of when it looks like your application is viable and you may be awarded the money, there'll be due diligence performed by Innovate UK team, and you will be contacted, and there'll be a communication containing what sort of requirements, because the specific profile of your company, your business maturity, your track record, previous grants awarded, etc., will drive the granularity of the inquiries. Generally speaking, it's if you're a mature business, it's sometimes you may need a supporting letter from your parent company. Sometimes you may need a letter from the bank. It varies. It depends on the profile of the company.
Thank you. Another question in from Maria Bartolo. Where can we find the cost attached to patient-reported outcomes? Example, pain reduction.
Take that. The honest answer is it doesn't exist. So not everything has a market rate currently. So if you wanted to work out the costs associated with pain reduction, you'd instead have to work out the difference in constituent costs. So how many times do people go to the GP with pain, how much medication do they take, their adherence to that, any injections, any time off work. It's doing it from the bottom up. Again, that's something that a health economist would do with you. Something, if you're doing qualities, it's easy. They're worth 20 grand each. Number of qualities multiplied by 20 grand and away you go. But for anything else, it's generally a bit more complex. So yeah, happy to talk further on that though.
Thank you, Simon. Next question is from Marion Ismail. Can health economics be part of an application?
Yeah, I would hope so, yes. Yeah, most definitely, yeah. Get it in there early, because it's such a winning point to prove that you're not it's one thing saying we think it's going to do this. It's another saying we think it's going to do this and we're going to demonstrate what it actually does. And the reality is that if you're looking at your commercial model and you're looking at your pricing, you're looking at realistic market sizing, you cannot do that without health economics. So if you're doing it properly, you will need to build it in.
Lovely, thank you, Simon. Yasmin's posted a question regarding getting SAMD approval. If research contractors are UK based, is it best for the application to get UKCA marked, or is EU CE equally valid?
Yes, thanks for the question. Generally speaking, that's a common question at the moment. UKCA is becoming more widely known, but at the moment, CE mark is accepted in the UK. So that, generally speaking, companies will seriously consider a CE marking first before they come to the UKCA marking. The main thing is about the route to market. So if you're focusing on the UK market first, the UK approvals are, let's say, a slimmed down version of what you would do for the EU. So in terms of that, the staged approach, you could get the UKCA first and then move to the EU requirements. So those are aspects you need to look into, and then it is gradually changing over time. But we do expect that there will be a recognition of the CE mark in the UK for quite some time.
Thanks, Giovanni. We've got a couple of questions here from Florian Jackal. First question is, what percentage of total costs you cover what different types of projects? Okay.
I will try to interpret that, and please do correct me if they. So the percentage of the projects is not driven by the type of project. So whether you go for the large grant or small grant, and the type of technologies that you are submitting, the costs need to be realistic, and you need to demonstrate value for money in terms of the overall percentage and how much you need to, excuse, my voice is going, excuse me, in terms of it's the size of the company that dictates the percentage that will be forked out by the Innovate UK, if you like, and the rest needs to be provided by the company. So let's say that the development of the new component is costing you £10,000. That means that when you're putting in your claim, and please do remember, and that was mentioned by one other speaker, that your claims will be paid for not in advance. You will not get the grant money at the outset or at intervals. You will be paid on deliverables quarterly, and you need to submit evidence that you have delivered the outcomes you said you delivered. So if it costs you £10,000, that means you get 7,000 from Innovate UK, and the 3,000 of the real world cost of delivering that development of that component will have to be covered by the company. So that's for small companies. And medium companies, the percentages vary by the size of the company rather than the type of the project as such, generally speaking, obviously, and how you cost things up and which components are permissible. This is all outlined in terms of how to create your costing matrix. And please do pay attention to what is allowed, what is not allowed, overheads, employment costs, etc., so that you don't fall out on the admin stage on something really silly by misinterpreting, for example, the minimum, the maximum expected, etc.
Thank you, Eva. Another question in from Florian. This is aimed at Giovanni. Does getting a regulatory approval, brackets, running a clinical evidence generation study, filing for approval, etc., fall under industrial research or experimental development? Will Innovate UK fund 70% or 45% in case of a small company?
I don't outright know the answer to that question. Generally speaking, the pre-market development, which we call the design and development phase, is in the medical devices world, would be seen to be research, so R&D. The first in human study or the early clinical studies, those would generally be seen to be developmental. I think the question around industrial development would be a later stage, and I'm not sure if there's a cutoff of which developmental stage would be considered for this grant. I would assume it's all products that are getting onto the market and not post-market. So I would assume that it's more on the experimental side of things.
Lovely, thank you very much. We've got 2 more questions, and second to last is from Henna Fry. TRL readiness level, published evidence requirements, BMC sub-focus areas, if any, for this grant call. If that makes any sense to anybody?
Yes, it does.
Go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead. I will just, okay. I'd say study the released materials really carefully and do attend that webinar, because basically TRL readiness levels, the definition of the TRL's readiness levels can vary between the products ever so slightly and subtly. So when someone was asking about software as medical device, the technology readiness levels definition of software as medical device may be slightly different than the technology readiness levels of hardware device versus combination drug delivery system or a therapeutic. So really scrutinize the conditions really carefully within this particular grant. I don't have time right now. I'm just looking at the clock. We're at 18:23. We don't have time to go in detail in terms of what is defined as technology readiness levels. Generally, this grant is about scaling up. So you need to have a fairly mature technology offer that can be scaled up rather than testing prototypes. So that's as a general rule. But in terms of percentages, what is allowed and the definition, the specifics, I would scrutinize really carefully what's been already released. And secondly, attend that webinar, which I will be doing myself as well. And the plan is that after the webinar, we will share a summary document with everyone if there are any differences between what's been published already and what is discussed within the webinar. And it's really useful to listen to those Innovate UK webinars, because you hear things that do not come very explicitly across in the written documentation. So it's quite educational to pay attention to that as well. But generally speaking, Innovate UK is more interested in more mature technologies that can be scaled up and commercialized and deployed at scale and can be expanded rather than early stage discoveries.
Lovely. Because 2 more questions, just both from Marianne, and one from Marianne and one from Alistair Monty. Marianne's just said, sorry, my question was perhaps not clear. This is directed at you, Simon. I meant, has the health economics work got to be done before the application?
No, so as touched on briefly in the slides, however, I appreciate they were quite whistle stop. There should be some form of health economic analysis done prior to this, just in terms of your wider impact on society and your wider benefit. You're going to want to do that properly. So why not do it properly? It shouldn't be a formal economic analysis. You're not going to be publishing it. No one's going to kind of hold you to account too specifically. But it is worth doing it properly. And I think the other thing is, if you're going into this stating the benefits that you're going to achieve, you need to have some realistic ideas of this. As Eva touched on earlier, you need to be exceptionally conservative and you need to do it properly, because the reviewers will be able to spot very quickly whether you've done it accurately or whether you've basically back of the enveloped it. So it's important that your estimates of value that you're putting out up front are realistic. Your job then, as part of the bid, should you go forward and include a health economic component, it's an evidence against that and see how close you get.
Lovely. And we've got just 2 final questions and then we'll give it call it there. Both from Alistair Monty. He said, thank you for the response on demonstrating financial viability. Please may I clarify with an example? Is the point in time where assessment would be made nearer May 2026 rather than December 2025, i.e. few months can make a big difference in startup fundraising timelines?
At the point, so your outcomes will be communicated in April, so you need to look at your Q1 viability and performance to date. So for example, if you've got massive gaps and your financial status goes up and down, that may sort of ring the alarm bells up to a certain extent. But it's about demonstrating stability and survivability of your business and the viability of the business into the future over the entire life cycle of the grant. So if you apply for 2 years, it needs to be credible that your business will survive and thrive and deliver the burden of the work you've committed to under the grant over that period of time. And the same goes for 3 years. And obviously considering this should make its way into your risk matrix. So for example, if you're a very early stage company, the fact that you may not secure the next tranche of funding, your runway, all this needs to be explicitly disclosed. And, everyone understands that startup scale-up companies are not sort of, your ARRs may be maybe not particularly impressive in the early stages, but they will accrue and occur in due course. But it's about demonstrating that you know what you're doing. You understand your runways, you understand when your next tranche of funding is coming from. You're not relying on the grant money to prop your cash flow. You're not relying on the grant money to prop your product development. It's an add-on rather than absolutely necessary factors of your survival as a business or the survival of your R&D activities. So that's something to bear in mind when you're describing the health of your business. And this will be all checked. So don't over-exaggerate, but be honest. But obviously, you'll be going for the grant money if you will survive and you will deliver this. Otherwise, there's no point going for this because, it's just squandering opportunities. So that will be sort of my feedback. So look at your Q1 of 26 and at your track record to date.
Thank you. And one the final question from Alistair. Are there template collaboration agreements that you could recommend, e.g. simple contracts, like per slide 18?
Should I answer that, Claire? I don't. Yeah,
Yes,
I mean,
please. Thank you.
so there are the most commonly known ones are the Lambert Toolkit and the Brunswick documents, which are available publicly. Those are collaborations, research collaboration agreements suitable where you're working industry, university, hospital, perhaps, but they're pretty detailed, so that I wouldn't describe them as super simple. Obviously, happy to have a conversation with anyone who wants a collaboration agreement, though, as I say, I'm not sure you need it before you submit a bid.
Lovely. Well, that brings a close to the webinar. So
Sorry,
you
Claire,
to all
can
our
I just very, very quickly clarify on the agreements needed and not needed? What I meant when I said, when I was talking about agreements is you need to have explicit agreements from all the participating partners. They don't have to be in writing, codified and formalized, but you need to be very clear that all your partners and co-applicants are committed with their resources and understand the timelines so you don't get tripped up somewhere along the process. Massive apologies for butting in.
No problem at all. So yeah, brings us to a close. So thank you very much, everybody. The recording and the slides will be shared with everybody in the morning. I'll give it time to download. And if you've got any questions, like we said, Eva's details are there on the slides, and our details are here. But they will be on the slide deck that is shared with you as a PDF. And if you want to get hold of any of the speakers, come through SEHTA directly, and I will then forward on your behalf. So thank you very much to everybody for attending, and enjoy the rest of your evening.
Thank you, Claire. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.